Okay. Oh yeah. Hi, could somebody speak?
Yep, you're audible and visible.
Thank you. Okay. Um, through voice. I'll just type it in chat. I will just type it in chat, but you will do it through voice. Just making it clear. The era of the great humiliation of China has come to an end. We are now the big red dragon in the international sphere, and we tell you that we want to maintain breathing the fire down the neck of our opponents, and that is how we maintain legitimacy. The first thing I'd like to clarify is our policy. How does significantly allocating the military budget look like? Note that the aerial research is not just planes. Note that these are also satellites, UAVs, drones, and balloons, which give us so much capacity to be able to get intel from other countries, but also significantly a lot of other research, like for example, GPS, or for example, better internet, because you are far less susceptible, for example, solar flares, or perhaps other, like for example, heavenly bodies that affect your satellites. But also, what we would posit is that significance means a lot. We'll like do it proportionally to the amount of money we currently have and in the status quo as China. But the important part of this policy, secondly, is that the budget for the military is already set. Opposition might say, oh, but we're going to increase the budget for other things and we have other problems like our economy. No, every year the budget is set for the military already. What we are debating about is whether or not the money should be spent more on aerial things rather than other things like boots on the ground or maritime, for example, or naval equipment. So what we say is that when there is already a budget set by the military, this is things that, for example, we would rather allocate towards aerial stuff and military or air stuff. Yeah. The third thing is that we would do this gradually and smart. The CCP is not stupid. We're willing to test these things or to form alliances to make sure that these things are effective in the future and that these things are functional and that we won't get outcompeted by other countries. So, what is the CCP and what interests? Yes.
If you want arms race, why would you do it slow?
Oh, okay. They will do it fast. Okay. So thank you for the TOI. So what is the CCP's interest? Xi Jinping's interests are two things. Number one, global power in three ways. Number one, ideologically, the ideological alternative to the United States. Number two, economic competition. They are an economic megalith that is competing against other countries in terms of like they are the biggest semiconductor producers and the biggest electric vehicle producers, which makes them an economic viable or competition that's viable to the US. Number three, they are militarily the bulwark of the nation, but they're currently getting outcompeted by countries who have been adapting to the maritime laws or, for example, their naval capacities. The second interest of the China of Xi Jinping is simply the internal legitimacy. Their optics is how they gain power, and that's why in China they ban Winnie the Pooh memes about Xi Jinping because it's bad for his optics. So optics is his main interest. How does he maintain it? First argument, therefore. Also, I just want to clarify. Sure, we'll do it fast, but also we're still smart in doing it. So we'll still research either way. First argument, why is this strategic for Chinese and Xi Jinping? The problem right now is that China is in a precarious situation. An F-55 Chinese vessel was shot down by a Filipino F-20, which is a big blow to the legitimacy of the aerial capacities of China, which is why China currently is the laughingstock of the international sphere because Philippines could shot down an F-55, the current best model of that airplane we currently have in the world, by an F-20, which was super old. But also, secondly, US and ASEAN have adapted to the boots on the ground and naval strategies of China, which means that Taiwan has already adapted a barbed wire strategy around its straits, but also Philippines has the United States support in terms of naval vessels surrounding it. The reason why opposition doesn't get any of the benefits under this is because of three things. Government gives you the shift on strategy that allows China and the CCP to outspeed the development of other countries, opponents like the United States. So if PH and Taiwan has to catch up with our military prowess in terms of aerial battle, then we will rapidly gain advantage. That is by getting more fear or perhaps getting more concession on the international scale, because now these people are less willing to say that, oh, stop doing what you're doing because we can fight you. Now they're going to be scared like, oh, please, China, don't do this. Your pains are probably better than ours. But the second thing is that we're going to bolster intelligence. Our capacity to be able to get information, intel, is China's advantage. But the problem on the opposition side is that when all of the countries cybersecurity is adapting already. We need to be able to change our strategy to be able to get that, which means that our significant investment in this means that we are going to outpace countries like Israel, United States, or United States in terms of our cybersecurity capacity. Now we are able to go past them and protect ourselves. Thirdly, in terms of allies, Russia and North Korea are our biggest allies. This creates more trust because they actually want to trade with you and innovate with you. Specifically, when China is already losing against Ukraine, this means that Russia is more likely to buy your planes, for example, which increases our GDP and our money as the CCP. But also, this increases our ties with them, which makes Russia and China a specifically harder enemy against the government to deal with. Why is this important? Because the burden under opposition is that they cannot get any of this adjustment and strategic advancements, which means that China is significantly likely to be more of a laughing stock under their paradigm, and people are not going to take them seriously. Comparatively, note that this is a debate about extents, but also there are three important impacts here. Under our paradigm, we increase the relevance of China because we strengthen them. We make them on top of the headlines. We make people fear us. Number two, our opponents become significantly scared, which gets us leverage in important negotiations that are happening right now. But thirdly, an economic leverage. When US and Israel and a lot of other countries can't do this right now, China can. Second argument, absent any military or strategic incentives, we tell you that there are a lot of research incentives. Economic pioneers against China is an economic pioneer against the US for semiconductors and electric vehicles. This is a big industry, especially when the world is moving forward in terms of green technology. Why do we get this better? The problem on the opposition side is that India, United States, Russia, and Japan have extensive aeronautic research already. Like, for God's sake, India already went to the moon. The impact of this is that China is currently the only superpower with no stake in space travel, with no flag on the moon, and with no development specifically towards it. The problem on the opposition side is because without any investments, they're unlikely to get any of these benefits, but also if they do it small and steady, they're probably going to be outpaced by other countries. They're going to say, but it paints a target on our backs. The targets are already on the backs of China. What this research does is defends us against other countries that are already doing this in the first place. Why is this good under our side? Three impacts. Number one, if we shoot for the stars, at the very least, when we achieve it, we get that type of dominance and we get the type of protection that we otherwise wouldn't have had, because if we didn't develop our aeronautics or our space industries, other countries would outcompete us and would probably make us the laughing stock. But number two, in our worst case that we fail in terms of getting to the moon, at the very least, we have a lot of other research and innovations that benefit us. Things like GPS, things like satellites, which we could augment our current productions like Huawei for and increase the economic capacity for us to be the first innovators of better cell phones, of better electronic vehicles, of better use of semiconductors. This is important because the amount of GDP that increases for China is significant. But also, this is something that UP cannot trade off just because they say there will be backlash. Backlash happens in any world because everybody fucking hates China. But if China is bold in this, it is strategic and it puts ourselves in the forefront in the future for 10 years, and nobody's likely to catch up. Proud to propose.
Great, thank you for that speech. Open the case of opposition. LO.
Hello. Can the LO just go to the bathroom? Just real quick.
Wait, sorry.
Sure.
Sure. Your timer. You have a timer.
Timer.
just set up my timer. Yeah, I'll start my speech. In 3, 2, 1, go. This debate is an after motion, therefore it is about CCP and merger interest ties to begin with. The team who will have this debate is the team who will maintain the rule of CCP over China the longest. That requires internal stability, requires internal economic sustainability. Kirby and I will prove about this later. But before I go to my setups rebuttal, they can't win this debate by just saying that the Philippine, shut off CCP vessel, which is false matter because it is between US and the Philippines. But even if not, let's forgive their false matter. Literally, China is still a military power comparative to its territorial conflicts. If the problem is detecting offenses, why don't we just develop our Air Force detection technologies, which is literally cheaper and in line with capacity? They have to perform gov. When a Philippine vessel, for example, shooting you makes you suddenly need to invest in a gigantic aerospace project. Other rebuttals will be integrated in my speech. Few setups. Who is CCP and what do they want? They want two additional things. One, they want to maintain China's global hegemony and regional imperialism around China and around Asia. That is through economic fevers that requires huge capital undertakings. We think it's severely hampered because of one, the risky and decoupling policies against China by Italy, Germany, and United States. Therefore, it is facing capital and consumption losses. Two, because of the global trend of isolationism and protectionism by countries pulling out of resources and trading with them. At the very least, the BRI project already brings considerable ideological bulwark in the status quo. But two, they want to maintain the economic stability of China in order to maintain power. The conditions of economic status of China are twofold. One, that is on the decline because of the Evergrande scandals of fake and corrupt data manipulation, of forging of friends with agricultural output, of rising middle class that leads to less foreign direct investment in production due to higher wages. Two, it's hard for them to maintain stability because one, the domestic consumption of China is too low for them to sustain the growth to begin with. It's undergoing low interest rate policies and social welfare policies to offset the lost GDP growth with the lack of trade or the weakening thereof due to the pandemic. Two, their only other alternatives are high capital and capital intensive industries such as quantum computing, etc. We think that these two interests precludes military dominance and precludes all of the other interests that Gov had told us to begin with. This is how the CCP steers power to their own party within People's Republic of China. What are airspace equipments and projects? These are satellites. They're expensive unmanned and manned stations in the space for military purposes. That means that it is isolated from other countries, even allies, because it's for military. What significantly allocating budget will look like actually? This looks like putting significant budget to PLAAF, which currently has no pre-existing infrastructure, and you sap it out from other budgets of different agencies that looks like they actually diffuse pre-existing military budgets that diversifies it, which means that you make it harder for the People's Liberation Army, that is for the People's Liberation Army to improve their military, navy, and air capabilities to have more concentrated forces, which are proximate to their needs, because these are the agencies that matters in terms of quelling aggression or portraying it, because these are the boots on the ground. Or you're going to sap out from other sectors, reduce lending, for example, within and outside of the country, reduce social welfare policies that keep the middle class in check, reduce police budget necessary, for example, to quell rebellion and the opposition. Or for example, this looks like you liquidate companies. This means that this is problematic to the two key characterization. Both global hegemony and economic stability requires a lot of money and capital to begin with. The teams who wins this debate and this round is the team who can assure that the stability of the CCP and the PRC to an extent is going to be maintained. What is the beauty of the status quo for the CCP? And this is the comparative that we're going to push from up in a direct response to Gov's case. We think that the current budget allocation of the CCP in the status quo is already enough to symmetrize the arms race with the West argument from the PM. One, we think that the existence of BRICS, the existence of other military alliances, North Korea ICBMs, are enough to power projects to project the power of China's capabilities, which means that the status quo do not kill the pre-existing balance of budget allocation of the CCP. And we think it is important in this debate, insofar as the reason why these alliances are existing is because this is how you save money in terms of the power that you project to begin with. But before I continue, what's up, POI?
So none of these economic policies are exclusive, but secondarily, we're only touching the military budget. That's what the motion reads. You have to read the motion.
You still need to contend to the diversification and the concentration, impact that I have told you earlier. But also, it's not. But also, when you massively significant allocate budget, that means that you significantly shift the priorities of the CCP, which means that it impacts, for example, the economic policies that CCP has over China. Continuing, two, we think that no matter what side government does, no matter the extent of military budget that we allocate to the PLAF, it can simply compare the gargantuan amount of budget that USA invests to begin with. Note that all impact from previous speaker is highly contingent to whether or not CCP can catch up to begin with. Gov needs to prove why this happens because PM never really explained why this is the case. Our point is that there is a decreasing marginal utility in terms of massively improving and allocating your budget in the PLAF for two key reasons. First, it's so expensive for China to do this cost effectively and strategically, insofar as the necessary equipment that the PLAAF needs in order to compete are those that can only be outsourced, for example, by Japan, by USA, and Taiwan, which means that China and the CCP is barred from getting these to begin with. That means that it either requires to build its own airspace military complex on its own, which is very expensive, or it has to import resources through underground and more dangerous means. This is more expensive. It's hard for you to gain marginal utility and comparative advantage in terms of military aerospace industry. But second, this saps out current resources from innovation industries that China needs to hold on to sustain and maintain its economy. These are industries that cannot gain or gain too little to no benefits from redirecting budget to PLAF, insofar as the nature of these power industries are theoretical in nature, i.e., quantum computing, e-vehicles, and tourist spaceships. These things do not translate well to the PLAF, but even if not, we still think that this is very harmful to the economy, insofar as airspace satellites, which are the most likely translation and manifestation of the budget, do not necessarily produce economic benefits to begin with. Like, you cannot sell this data, insofar as doing so reveals what you know. CCP will just spend enormous amount of money for nothing. You cannot use military spaceships for tourist spaceships and space travel to improve your economy. But also, what you need to understand is that there is a difference between military research and economic and technological research. Do not credit it and do not credit and believe it when they told us that things about GPS in their side is going to be better. This only happens if and only if the tech and the budget, for example, is false. And you see, this only happens if and only if the CCP and the government of China in itself are prioritizing economic development instead of military budget, right? Three, and lastly, the current focus of PLA, which is their military, navy, and their air forces, are the most proximal interests of the CCP now. That is to say that protecting the whole South China Sea and protecting CCP's hold of Taiwan. Notice how all of these current territorial interests are more fundamental to Xi Jinping, and a significant decrease, for example, to the capital they put into all of these aerospace, aerospace projects. It's a big risk because this will not increase their advantage exponentially in these kinds of conflicts and these kinds of conditions. Thanks.
Great, TPM.
Audible and visible.
Yep.
Where's my phone? Can I borrow a timer?
just-
Sorry.
We're not using our background.
Ay, ano?
Oh, that's the OG background.
It's visible.
Wait lang. Sorry. Ay, wait. Sige ko na.
Sorry, this is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, we're just changing the background. Don't worry.
You should just be able to scroll down, Luca. It should be downloaded now on your Zoom.
No, wala. Hindi siya. It doesn't show.
Really?
I'm so sorry. Wait lang, guys. Hold on.
Bro.
Jubilon.
Actually, you can use mine. I already have it.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so we'll switch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. Okay, thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Flip that.
Okay. PI's your voice. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. The CCP does not want another great embarrassment because the downfall of opposition side is to try to frame this weird characterization that China is a little baby that cannot handle things like aerospace or airspace military capacities. Because at the point at which they say, oh, it's about the economy, oh, it's about how we're able to allocate this budget efficiently, they don't really engage with the main clarification that comes from our policy at Haduka, that if opposition actually read their notes, they would know that the motion is about the military budget and how we're able to allocate the set budget that already exists within it, and not exactly talking about just getting a lot of money from other aspects or other sectors. They have to disprove our frame first, since this is likely to be the likely incentive of the CCP anyway in the status quo. But even then, they don't prove why exactly this is the alternative that the CCP is likely to take. But even then, if that is true, because they don't build it, I will still engage with it charitably through my extension later on. But secondly, I want to point out the urgency of the military because they try to like skirt this at the point at which they just say that, oh, there's already existing military ties that you can have from other allies. One, note that a lot of these allies are already economically weak. Like Russia and North Korea are also on a decline, given that they have their own priorities with things like the Ukraine and other types of like conflicts that happens within their own territory. So note that a lot of their security ties right now are unreliable, or at the very least not something that they can actively like want to like incentivize opting into, at the point at which a lot of these people are not going to be something that Xi Jinping will actively see as a reliable actor. But secondly, that the world is surpassing them in a key aspect, that because technology is advancing to the extent that they can get aerospace forces, or that they can have these other types of technologies. Obviously, China, wanting to be a global superpower that they concede is something that is within their priority, would still want to be able to catch up on these types of aspects and endeavors. So we don't understand why under their paradigm, this is not something within the interest of the CCP already, when a lot of the reasons why they want to do things or invest in things is because they want to get ahead of these industries while they are still budding and while they are still in the like thriving stage. So therefore, a lot of the reasons that we told you coming from Haduka still stand, and they don't really directly engage why exactly this is not something within their interest. But therefore, I'm going to prove to you that one, in terms of the interest of military, why this is exclusive when it's aerospace and not boots on the ground. But secondly, that if the idea of economy is so important to them, we still win under that metric. Firstly, on military, why is this exclusive on government when you are using the significant allocation of budget towards aerospace? Two reasons. One, it is within your capacity to be able to get ahead of the race at the point at which other developing countries do not have access to this type of information and data. Notice that because you are, as China, a large country that is still likely to be an economic powerhouse in status quo, even to the extent that you have a housing crisis or some sort of setbacks, you're still extremely strong. So we think that at the very least, you are still able to create some sort of technology to some extent, or at the very least create innovation in terms of blue skies, so you can gain like leverage in terms of like satellites or GPS like machineries. But the second thing, because it's a new frontier, you have the leverage, or you have the disproportional advantage at the point at which everyone else is unfamiliar with this. So your extent of success is much larger compared to having just investing again and again through the boots on the ground strategy, which we have seen is already something that other countries are catching up on. So you have people like the Philippines or Taiwan, for example, that are being backed by the US, and because they are also actively being given these arms or given these like armed forces in regards to US boats, for example, these are not effective anymore, given that they are also very much familiar with these types of technologies, or at least the strategy or the approach they can have in order to combat us in the end. So at the very least, if we invest in this now, we can catch up on it as the CCP, and we're able to like nip it in the bud at the point at which they don't have access to this type of things at the end of the day. That's only things that you get when you exclusively significantly allocate your budget within aerospace. You don't get this when you have boots on the ground or naval maritime vessels. The second thing, therefore, so that proves in terms of military, all of the things that comes from Haduka is still standing, and we still get it exclusively and certainly under our side. The second thing is engaging under the metric of the economy. I'm going to extend as to why this is likely to be better for your economy for three structural reasons. One, military expansion directly invests in things like machine and tech manufacturing. What does this look like? Note, the semiconductor race between Taiwan, China, and US is crucial in this debate because the most important chip in the world is semiconductors. And notice that because of the chip ban under the US, we're not allowed to be able to trade or use this information or intel with the US or Taiwan. Therefore, the chip ban has forced us to be self-reliant. This specific allocation proves to you that this is going to expedite the process as to which we become self-reliant on these types of chips and semiconductors. That means that our ability to have machinery and tech manufacturing is much larger to our extent because we are putting it in space capabilities and space policies. That means that we are having a more sustainable industry, not only in the ability for us to have armed forces in the air, but also in general, just having technology and machinery that is likely to have a lot more like technological advancements because of this reason. Second, you produce resilient raw materials. Notice that the strongest steel industry or steel sector is from China. That means that where we create capacity to utilize our most efficient and profitable industry is only when we have more maximizing ways to use this, which is in the aerospace forces. We think that therefore, that is something that we have to have an incentive for in order to make use of our more resilient resources. Go up, PI.
if you're gonna use it in the military, why would you aggressively trade your semiconductor or your chips outside the country? That's literally unstrategic.
We said that we would invest in researching it so they can be more self-reliant. Listen to my speech. The last thing is, and this is a big one, it's a big market in selling arms. Everyone is fighting a war right now, and Russia and North Korea is likely to trust you again once you have the machinery and the technological advancements you get from the significant allocation of budget. The US is preoccupied with Israel and Ukraine. This is your chance to create more money when you're selling arms, when you're selling these machines and these satellites and these GPS like machineries. This is where you get a advantage economically as well. This proves to you that on all three structural reasons, even to the point that it's not about military, you're still likely to invest in this in a better way at the point at which the economy will largely and exponentially gravitate towards your advantage if you are also going to invest in this. The last thing that I want to posit is politics, because it's something that will still likely occur in the US, in Chinese incentives. One, we think that those that cannot beat you will join you. More allies willing to create security ties and agreements only happens under our side when internationally you are seen as a threat, when you are seen as a capable actor that can protect other people, because people are already having anti-Western sentiments towards the US and they have very specific principles. You can also assume that other countries that do not align with them will likely go to China instead, and therefore citizens will feel secure with your military capabilities, and you create a better superpower at the point at which a lot of these countries will likely side with you
Time.
instead. With all of these reasons, you have to side with government because we proved to you all of these metrics. Proud to propose.
Great. DLO.
Hello, am I clearly audible and visible?
Yep, you're audible and visible.
Oh yeah. If ever like you do raise a POI, you'll be heard in my recording, so I hope that's fine. Okay, hold on. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If you are the big red dragon that Haduka says, then all the more it is key to your success to only move the necessary chess pieces that force your opponent to concede because there are no other moves available. Realize that the benefit of aerospace development and the whole claim on government that this will eventually trickle down to the rest of the Chinese community and economy is a lie, because they never really explain why, for one, the direct shift and significant allocation to the PLAAF is going to significantly improve the current economy by virtue of you not be able to reach out of other budgets, because you've already told it specifically coming from Kuya Jack that eventually the mechanism is that even if there's a separate military budget, which I think is a flimsy safety net, I think that this doesn't work, because significant allocation means that, for one, if it's not enough, because I want to note that the purchase and the equipment and the necessary accessories required for aerospace equipment is extremely, like, super expensive, right? So at the point in which you need more of these resources, eventually what you'll do is you're going to leech out of other industries, as we made mention. But even if that's not the case, what you're going to do is leech out of other industries, like the economy, for instance, or other pre-existing industries that the CCP banks on. I think, for one, the major case that we get coming from government is simply a misguided attempt to win out in competition. I think that this won't stand. I want to clarify one major thing. What's the extent of the significant allocation to the PLAAF? I think when government says that the debate is on the military budget and that opposition should read their notes, I think this is just a flimsy safety net, because, again, as I made mention, significant allocation already means on the onset that you're willing to trade off other things in exchange for you being able to build all of these aerospace equipment on the very first place. Kuya Jack says that it's a dichotomy, that it's either you leech out of military budget or you leech out of industrial budget. I think, for one, this is contradictory by just virtue of the CCP principle, because the CCP is selfish. You have the perverse incentive to maintain power, and you have they have prioritized state over external responsibility towards beating out other competitions, for instance. But even if you don't buy that, I think that long-term development is hampered, because the CCP is well known for balancing its military and economic capacities. So at the point in which you overinvest in the aerospace contribution, whatever that you get coming from government, then all the more that your economic standing and other economic industries that you have are weakened, because this is where you have to leech out of your resources in order for you to improve this goal that you want to have on government. I think this just doesn't make any sense on their side. I think that the impact just from the clash coming from the first speakers is clear. That it's a misguided attempt from the CCP to win against competition, e.g. that the US, and go to engage this later on. I have 4 responses for Gov. Firstly, they say that the budget is already set. I think for one, we have disproven this already, but I'm going to explain later why this is cost ineffective for their side of the debate, and they never explain this coming from the first 2 constructive speakers, right? Secondly, then coming from Maduka, they say that instead of doing it gradually, let's do it fast. I think that either scenario is problematic, because even if the timeline is gradual or it's quick, I think that the pull-out of budget is a deterrent to prospective goals of the CCP. If they want to champion on existing boots, for example, they want to champion on the economy, like trade deals, for instance, like be able to win out against the US, for instance. I think that this is a very problematic case, because at the point at which you significantly allocate to the aerospace thing that you want to have on government, then all the more that you're incentivized to pull out of these economic structures, pull out of these these industries that you'd want to develop on the ground. The third response I want to launch is that coming from Haduka, they say that the Russia will buy your satellites in place, and that eventually this will increase your GDP, right? I think that we can still do it on our side, because PIDC explains why we still have the incentive to be able to at least explore and research and development, for instance, again in chat. So at least on our side, even if it's not significant allocation, we still have the incentive to do it on our side. The difference is that it's not a significant allocation. And take note, BPM contradicts this, because when they see that Russia is already on a decline, so the GDP benefit coming from Prime Minister doesn't work, because no one will buy your satellites, no one will buy your planes, because the most proximate actor to acquire them in the first place is already on a decline, as made mention. The last thing I want to respond to coming from them is that your opponents will be scared. I think for one, this scare factor is unnecessary, because even Haduka concedes that the US is the only contender against China, so you're already able to determine who is your direct opponent. So what's the point of putting out satellites to be able to determine who is likely going to invade the China, or likely to battle you out in an arms race, for instance? But second, if you're already allied with Russia or Japan, then this is already pretty scary enough for other countries to not challenge you. But even if you don't buy that, I think that the fear factor is already marginal. So why not scare them on other contexts, probably cultural dispossession or technological integration in your own economy, which are more proximate to the CCP, as we mentioned, coming from PIDC. So the aerospace materials, as we may mention, is just cost ineffective, and the countermeasure on our side still works. I just have one main extension. Why the actor on their side, on both sides rather, has little to no incentive to allocate with this aerospace thing, and why it's significantly far more worse coming from their side of the house. But before I proceed, I'll take that TOI. Sure.
So I'm quite confused. What economies or industries will you bolster up on your side? Your comparative doesn't really exist yet.
So again, because if just coming from Prime Minister, we concede that China is already this global superpower. So just by intuition pump, that means then that they already have pre-existing economies that defeat out other economies in the market. What this means then is that it's a deterrence when you significantly allocate to this aerospace goal. Because at the point in which you significantly allocate, we have already told you coming from the countermeasure, this is likely going to leach out from these existing economy and the industries that you have already protected, you have already developed. Who is the CCP and what are their priorities, right? There are 3 levels to this. Firstly, we told you why there are 3 factions that dominate CCP, which is basically who gets to decide on what's their incentive, right? Firstly, we have the Shanghai Gang, who eventually favors and emphasizes on economic foreign investment. You have the Chinese Communist Youth League, who prioritize interior regions, which Aduka also concedes about internal legitimacy, right? Thirdly, you have the Shi Gang, who eventually places premium on alleviating domestic poverty. What does this mean then for the debate? That number one, the CCP is more self-interested, that they are locked into their own conditions as well. Second, this intuitively means that this is the burden of proof on government, that the investment on aerospace undertaking will eventually trickle down. At best, they say that there's an increase in GDP or increased research. This is literally status quo, guys. We concede that the benefits on status quo is already an increase on GDP, for instance, or an increase in research, because we've already told you coming from PIDC why these things are still likely. But the last thing I want to deal with is inherently contradictory. Gov says China wants to be ahead in this particular aspect, but at the same breath recognize that the aerospace context is an unfamiliar context, which means that even if you believe the benefits of development of GDP, there's basically a time lag as to which people understand and essentially buy all of these materials from the CCP, for instance. So if people are catching up on the ground, and this is a new territory that we should explore, and the logic is that you want the CCP to be more self-reliant in the future, I think that for one, the strength of the CCP relies on its pre-existing boots. So if you want to disregard the existing boots in government's model, then you essentially weaken out the stature and the economic incentive
Time.
of CCP to be able to improve their this aerospace undertaking. I think in this debate, even if you get all of the benefits on government, I think it's just a misguided attempt to win out in competition. Proud to oppose.
Great. Go for it.
Right. Am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Great. He, him, Mezen. If you want a POI, let's make it fun. Turn on your camera, raise your hand, or you could just say POI once. I'll make sure to take you. To make it even better, I might take 2 POIs. Because we're nice that way. All right. When you've conquered the seas and have boots on the ground, the space becomes the last frontier and the tipping point to win the superpower arms race, which is what positions China to be the global superpower it props itself to be. The first thing I want to do in this debate is clarify the burden of the motion. What does the significant allocation of military budget specifically look like? It looks like allocating 80% of your military budget to aerospace industries and to the aerospace capability. It does not look like allocating 50% of the Chinese economy and the Chinese GDP to your military budget. These two things are separate. I think opposition needs to reread the motion and try to understand it to some degree. But I'll be charitable and engage on their debate on economics because they're also losing that one. The first issue of this debate is, where is China better off militarily? This is the most important issue in this debate because it is a question of where we should allocate our military budget. So the team that proves where the military budget is best going to be allocated and why it's most effective in that way wins this debate. Notably, opposition does not even contend on this. They just concede to it from first. What did they say under opposition? Well, they don't really say anything. The most that they say is that our current allocation is enough to stave off everything with no analysis to prove why our current allocation is necessarily effective and why that's necessarily sufficient. So I don't think you can necessarily believe that. But even if that is the case, I think it is unengaging to the frame pushed to you by Haduka, which says that we need this at the tipping point. But sure, let's assume that it is enough and that our current allocation of our budget, which looks like allocating our money to our naval capacity and our on the ground military personnel, I think their analysis works against them. Because if it is true that it is enough, then clearly there's a need to diversify our investments in our military budget for several reasons. One, because you have already invested so much in your naval capacity and your infantry, notably it means that there's diminishing marginal utility. Any additional budget that you allocate to this becomes ineffective or inutile because you've already invested so much into this. Secondarily, because they say that this is enough, there's clearly no more reason to further invest in this. The comparative on our side is clear. You ought to diversify your military budget in order to gain more utility out of it. And this is only possible when you allocate it to the aerospace industry in the first place. Why does this make us comparatively better militarily? The first reason is that our intelligence gathering capabilities become significantly better when we have satellites. We are able to then stave off our enemies, which note are very many. We have Taiwan that we're defending against in the US. We have the South China Sea conflict. We are constantly defending against India. Therefore, our capacity to gain more information through these satellites significantly enables China to become far better off strategically because now they have more information to make decisions. Secondarily, because we become far more threatening as a force against other countries because now we are enabled in an aerospace capacity. And note this is critically important because no other country has defenses against aerospace weapons in the first place. Therefore, meaning that we become far better off militarily to no comparative coming from opposition. This issue is, we are winning this issue very clearly in this debate because it proves to you as to why our money, our military budget is far better off in government. And this is already sufficient to win the debate because it's a debate about your military budget and not any other budget. I don't think you can credit opposition. But I want to be charitable. Let's engage with opposition's case. Where is China better off economically? This is important because both sides agree that it's important, right? What do they say under this? Well, we shouldn't take money away from our economy because the economy is quite shit and it's collapsing. We need to reinvest in our industries. The comparative isn't clear. I gave DLO a chance to talk about what their comparative looks like, such as bolstering up their local industries. There is no clear path to victory from their side as to how bolstering up your local industries will then lead to the benefits of saving China's economy in the first place. Therefore, they can no longer build this at whip. I just want you to take note of this because there's an absence of a comparative on their side versus the comparative on our side, where it's very clear as to how we're able to economically empower China for several key reasons. One, we're investing in a new industry that everyone is involved in the first place. I want to note that investing in this with our military budget doesn't mean that we take away budget from our local economy. This is separate from a military budget. It proves that it is not exclusive what they're trying to prove. We can still invest in our local economies and our local industries without having to necessarily have it come at the cost of your aerospace industry. But also, notably, they say that, how are you going to be able to compete against the US? The first reason is because this is not a bipartisan issue. The US is slow at making decisions because there are multiple bipartisan issues, such as investing in space in the first place, which significantly slows it down, which is why they lost the race when it came to producing green energy. Notably, it looks like the US producing green energy first, and then China coming in and beating them out massively just because they started investing in it. CCP has complete monopoly over decision making, therefore they're able to do this. Several other reasons coming from my deputy. First, because we create a self-reliant chip industry, we become far more empowered as a semiconductor industry. China is very capable of doing this because they are working directly with Taiwan. So if it's about chips, China is most capable. Second, it's about your raw materials. China is the biggest steel producer in the world. Therefore, they are best capacitated to encourage and build a space industry in the first place because they have the raw materials necessary to make it work in the first place versus the US, who is reliant on Japan, who has to ship it out to the US first before they can embolden their space industry in the first place. So yes, first we can catch up, and second, yes, we can surpass them in the first place, and this is evidenced by the green energy race in the first place, proving to you as to why we are far better off in terms of competition. But the second impact of this is know that we are able to bolster the economy of China far better off because all of the subsidiary industries, such as the raw material industry and the semiconductor industry, are now further emboldened by this fact because we rely on this for the space industry in the first place. We expand these industries and make them far better off, which is then a clear path to prove to you as to how we're far better off economically versus an opposition where they don't have anything. What's your POI?
Green tech is different here because China is barred from outsourcing from Japan, Taiwan, and USA. It's a false matter that they are self-reliant producing all these aerospace crafts, given that they don't have any raw materials in producing this. Therefore, all of your effectivity falls.
Okay, the green energy is an example. Second, it's not false matter. China is the biggest steel producer in the world. Let's read up, let's use the internet sometimes, right? You can't just say it's false matter and assume that this is a valid response. The last thing I want to deal with then is general weighing of this debate. The first thing then is on the military aspect. We've clearly won out this debate for several reasons. One, we are certain that we gain the tipping point and the strategic advantage when we're able to invest and diversify our military in the first place. We are not sticking to pre-existing strategies that have already been solved and been figured out by the ASEAN in the first place. We become far more strategic and far better. We are certain that this is a good benefit on our side. Second, and when it comes to the allocation of our military budget, we are certain that it becomes far more utile on our side and fulfills the purpose of the CCP, which is to maintain themselves as a global superpower in the first place optically. On opposition side, the most that they focus on is on the economy, and they're willing to trade off the military benefits, which therefore means they're unengaging to the true spirit of the motion. But even lastly then, when weighing off the economy, we clearly proved a clear path to victory as to how we improve the economy of China by investing in the aerospace industry. So even if we have to take the trade-off of allocating a significant budget to the aerospace industry, we prove to you as to how this trickles down because all of the raw material industries are reliant on this in the first place. Therefore, proving that even in the economic debate, we are winning by a significant margin. For all of these reasons, you have no more reason to oppose.
Great. Up whip.
Hi, I'm Carl. You have to chat, please, but I'll take one. Promise. I'm gonna start my speech with my first word. I'm gonna start my speech now. If you listen carefully to Jack's speech, you will realize there's straw manning our case this whole round. Jack suggests there's a too likely manifestation of significantly allocating the budget contending the framing from Haduka. The first is agreeing to Haduka and suggests that, oh, there's a linear military budget. We're going to compartmentalize it by adding another sector, which is the PLAAF. But we suggested the second point of framing, which we think is also likely. Because note that if the CCP is smart, therefore the CCP is going to allocate more military budget in the future once they actually try to significantly allocate the budget to PLAAF. Mainly because Aerospace Force is just so fucking expensive to that point in which that they need to increase the military budget in the future. So the second likely manifestation of the policy is that you will have to increase the military budget by decreasing and decoupling other sectors in the House. But note that all of the arguments from opposition is about tackling all these two framings all at once. And they failed to completely concede to all of these arguments and just say that we're all dismissive and not really recognize the arguments from this round. I think this debate is an artificially induced deadlock by government because they're completely dismissive of how our frame works and completely dismissive of like how the motion really works in this debate. But if they're talking about and their focus is military, then I'm gonna weigh all of my 5 minutes to military and say that what Jack and Kirby's contribution is actually debate winning is something that's in line with the CCP. I will weigh three things about military. The first is on effectivity, the second is on time horizon, and lastly is on interest, which is the most important. Gov push is that the world isn't expanding in the global aspect. We need to win the aerospace armed forces. We can't lose out, and that's China's interest. Note that there's no clear mechanism how they're gonna access these impacts. Their only push for effectivity was a late build from GovWhip and suggests that, oh, this is not like a bipartisan issue in USA where they need to actually talk it out and consolidate this CCP. And just like green tech, they can actually win the green tech. Note that there are a lot of different contexts that came from Jack, from the leader of opposition, why this is more likely cost ineffective for China. That is to say that one, unlike like the green technology, you have to outsource your equipments outside. It's not enough for you to be the greatest producer of steel. You need to outsource a lot of equipments from Japan for you to be able to advance your aerospace force development. You need to outsource some form from Taiwan or some semiconductors from USA for you to do this. But they agreed. We're literally barred from trying to trade from these countries. But their only contention is, oh, we can be self-reliant. And that's where they lose because they fail to enact the mechanism. How are you going to be effective if you're super self-reliant in developing your aerospace force? That is to say, you need to trade out, you need to outsource equipment. But if you do, you have to prove on government, and that's their burden of proof, that you being self-reliant from all your equipments and raw materials is going to make it effective for you to build an aerospace force that can compete against USA. Therefore, they already lose in effectivity because we gave you structural reasons why, number one, you can't be self-reliant because of the economy, which is the economy push from Jack, and they completely strawman. And two, why you need to outsource a lot of these equipments and you're barred from outsourcing, therefore it's gonna be slow and it's not gonna be too effective because of these gradual development, and you can completely compete in the world aspect. The second thing is on time horizon. Even if it's effective on the long term, so you are already developed your aerospace, you already have satellites that has GPS. The time horizon in which you have completely disbarred the Navy, the Air Force, and the military of budget that quells rebellion, that quells the South China Sea, that hinders Taiwan and different sea vessels from shooting for shooting Chinese vessels, is the timestamp they failed to recognize in this round. Jack and Kirby was able to completely surgically explain this, that in the time in which you're developing, you're completely hampering the very fundamental, it's 4 minutes pa. You're completely hampering the fundamental and the proximate interests of China. If you agree on government, that, oh, it's necessitated by the USA because they're already building forces in Taiwan, in Japan, in South Korea, in the Philippines, the more you need to actually invest on your vessels now, invest on your Navy now, invest on your Air Force detection now, rather than a gigantic Aerospace Force development that will not be completely ensurably give you a lot of the benefits you need. But if their problem is like detecting and all these shits, then we can just improve our Air Force detection. I don't know why, and that's the burden of proof, why you need a gigantic aerospace development for you to do this. The time horizon that you're developing, even if you are going to beneficially develop this, is a time where you're completely hampering your whole military, and you're already internally unstable because you're losing your grip in Asia and all these territories. Therefore, I think in the time horizon, they lose even on government. Before I the third, what's the POI?
So it's funny that you talk about false matter, but you can't even point to what exactly they will outsource. They don't need to outsource from Japan because they already have a strong technological industry and a steel industry. They don't need to outsource from Taiwan because Taiwan is a Chinese province, which they can take from anyway.
No, they don't have the capacity now to do semiconductor. We pointed out from Jack. They don't have infrastructure on building the Aerospace Force, even if they have the technology. So yeah, I think that's already has been explained from Jack, that you're just completely dismissive about and assume that China is already technologically so good, given that they don't even have the initial infrastructure in these aerospace. The third thing is on interest. If it's true that you get to have compete against USA and its arms race, is it in your interest now as CCP? We told you from Jack and Kirby structural reasons why you need the economy to flourish. You need to quell rebellion within CCP. You need to actually get a hold of your Belt and Road initiatives and the ports you have, which is actually funded by the has military there, has military bases there. You need to fund, for example, your whole grip in South China Sea, given that USA is currently trying to, build bases in the Philippines and other countries. Which means that even if you get these aerospace forces, the current interest of the CCP now is not in line to this. Therefore, we believe, even in their best case, the interest of CCPs to not significantly allocate their budget here, but rather stick in the status quo where they need to hold their grip in Asia and the region that they need. That's what they need for internal stability. That's what Xi Jinping needs.
Great. To close the case of opposition reply, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, audible and visible.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The motion is yes, in the context of a military budget, but this presumes that the current budget is sufficient and that the CCP has enough technological structures to be able to build all of these aerospace things that government wants to bank on. This is where Carl's clarification was particularly important, because there was still no mechanism on the gov that, yeah, you allocate 80% of your quote-unquote military budget, but one, is it sufficient enough for you to actually build good quality space projects on your side of the debate, which is the question coming from Pierre? That's why we provide you with the countermeasure as to what's the likely manifestation of this at the point in which you significantly allocate. We tell you what the likely outcome is if you're able to reach out to other industries, for instance, because aerospace equipment is extremely expensive. Even if China is so rich as they say, they have to provide what are the current industries or the factories or the structures that China has insofar as technological innovation is concerned. They are yet to respond to this coming from reply, right? So the intuitive resolution is that you're able to trade off other industries under their side of the house, which we told you coming from off is significantly far off. Gov's Hail Mary is two things. Let's explore the unexplored, and reaching for the stars will eventually trickle down to the rest of the nation. There are two questions that I want to ask. First, will this make them the best superpower? Gov says that this is the only way. But I think for one, there's a lack of discussion on the incentive mechanism as to how this directly empowers China on regional blocks, for instance, right? We tell you three structural reasons why the CCP will prioritize self-legitimacy. This is in concession with government because they say that the interest of the CCP is to self-legitimize themselves and I don't know, just prioritize themselves and just be selfish, right? We tell you why it's in their best interest to just prioritize and develop inferior regions, for instance, or just essentially literally dominate the existing economic market, right? So even if we get majority of the benefits on Gov, but this is a result of you being able to disregard your own economy because at the point in which you significantly allocate, it has reached the conclusion that you have to like take out a certain portion of your own economy so that you're able to build new factories that like vouch for good aerospace equipment, right? And I think that's just significantly terrible. But even if you do not buy that analogy, I think that DPM and GovWeb already concedes the externality that aerospace deters its value. They say that the airspace is something that people are not necessarily familiar with. And I think that this is terrible. So for one, people do not contend. So at the point in which like you are able to build the grandest form of aerospace equipment, then no, like the people won't be scared. So what's the impact of it? Because they don't necessarily explore this particular area. We told you why that's just significantly far more harmful. The second question that I want to ask, are the physical manifestations good? Gov says that you have increased GDP and research. We told you why research is symmetric. Like we've already told you there are existing structures in current status quo that allow the CCP and China just generally be a more marketable research institution, right? But for the GDP context, we told you why DPM just directly knives this because if Haduka says that your main, like the people that you're likely to trade with is Russia, for instance, or other superpowers all around, we say that when DPM says that most of these countries are already in a decline, that's why they want to do this policy so sudden, then I don't think that this makes any sense. Likely, you want to do this to like just better your optics or your image as the CCP or China at large. I think that this is insufficient because insofar as militarization is concerned, it's not enough to just be better by just virtue of image, but likely at least make these things be felt by people on the ground. That's why we told you that the status quo is still far more better because at least we're able to develop existing institutions and the existing power that China has over regions, for example, or over specific countries or over specific like regions or whatever. I may not know much about IR, but I think that in this debate, insofar as that the CCP is concerned with its self-legitimacy and the prioritization of their own interests, I think it's only up that was able to discuss to you why, for one, the significant allocation to all of these aerospace equipment coming from Gov is just significant. It just doesn't make any sense. But even if it does make sense, we told you why the trade-offs are far more worse because you significantly have to do something about your economy. You have to cut down on budget on other institutions, which we told you is the basic foundation of the CCP and China's power that allows them to be the superpower that they are. So at the point in which you cut them down on their side of the debate, then I don't think China will be the red big dragon, as Haduka says. For all of these reasons and more, proud to oppose.
Great. To close the entire debate, Gov reply, please.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, not my teammate. Good, visible, audible.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Op reply is right about one thing. They don't know much about IR. The first thing I'm gonna do is strategic observations as why opposition loses immediately. The first thing is note the negative case under opposition. We have clearly told you, guys, just like early on, that opposition has no counterfactual. They say let's invest in other things. What are the other things? They don't even know what the other things are. They don't even know what their military looks like. So I just think by off of this, like they're just not fulfilling a big part of their burden. They have to lose. The second thing is that look at how they responded to Loreen, my DPM. They never give you any response towards Loreen, and means that a lot of the pivots that Loreen gave are still standing within this debate. The fact that a lot of countries are engaging in war meant that there is still a high demand for people to buy out airplanes, to buy out all of these satellites, for the reason that even if they are poor, they need to defend their country. That's why a lot of country spending on military or on their GDP is in fucking military. The final thing is just like the call to false matter. Obviously, this is not false matter. We researched this well. Like, it's better, but I think at least sa amin, my false matter. Under this, they just don't have matter. First path to victory. Military. We think that the claim under our side is that when you have opponents that are adapting to you at an incredibly fast pace, this is an existential threat. DLO concedes this by saying that territory is important. Why are we still winning this? Because if you have to believe opposition's case, you have to believe a lot of jumps in analysis to be able to do that. That is, you have to first believe that a lot of other countries haven't adapted to it, which is something that they just never disprove. They double down on this and say that, yeah, we'll just invest on more naval or more boots on the ground. And then what's the comparative advantage? You're just diminishing the utility of all of the additional boots on the ground, making it significantly harder for you to be able to win in war and to be able to invest in these properly, because for those boots on the ground to be effective, you need significantly more of them to be successful in your endeavors. But the second thing is that under their side, they just never demonstrate what their military is likely to look like. They just say we'll invest in it more. How? What is the new thing that opposition is providing? They're just status quo, and this is not a good defense. But the second thing they say is that, yeah, like a lot of these things are already like going to be like it's going to be fine. But when the context under our side is that US and Taiwan have acquired a barbed wire strategy and the Philippines has shot down an Chinese F-55, means that we currently have like a lot of like the benefits of our strategy as a military slipping through our fingers all the time. What we need to do is capture every minute. That is to be able to invest in a lot of the other things that other people cannot comprehend yet, because those are the ways we gain advantage in terms of intel and in terms of fear. The second sub-issue under this is that leverage. They say that a lot of other countries are losing already, so why would they have an incentive to fight with you? The fact that US, we described, is fighting NATO, is fighting Taiwan, is fighting Israel with Israel means that this is a good time for China to be able to invest in things that their opponents need. Like, for example, we can invest in Iran, we can invest in Russia, in North Korea, who are active opponents of the United States, giving us the capacity to win over them in the fight against global hegemony. Second path to victory. Why do we think we win the economy? This is ops win condition, so if we win this, we win large on a large margin. Opposition's attempts to neutralize this case is say that, but a lot of these other countries are poor. Poor countries can spend in military, they spend on a lot of these things, that's why the Philippines has an F-20. The second thing is that under the POI, it's unstrategic to sell it because you sell it off to other people who might use it badly. Obviously, this is uncharitable. Let's be reasonable. We framed out that China is likely to be smart in the way that they implement this policy, they'll talk to their allies, and they'll do it well. What do we win therefore? Three things. The fact that there is a timeline problem under opposition's case because they say that we can't be self-reliant is very dismissive of the framing in status quo. We are already self-reliant. The chip industry already exists. We're not going to be self-reliant in the future. It already happens. The fact that we can produce EVs significantly faster because we have semiconductors is proof for that. But secondly, we have resilient raw materials, which meant that under our side, we have more sustainable industries and we don't actually have to invest so much significant funds for this, and it's actually really easy to do. But finally, the big market to sell arms. The fact that you can sell this is big profits for your economy, which means that this policy pays for itself. What this effectively does, it tells you that under our paradigm, like we really want to be charitable, but there's just really no trade-off. The policies we provided to you had a lot of like offshoot benefits in the future and in the short term, which we think gives government the clearest win. Proud to propose.
Great, what an awesome debate. You may now cross the house.